Welcome, sleepy soul. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to help you drift into deep, peaceful sleep. Before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more bedtime stories. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. And if there's a story you'd like to hear next, I'd love to know that, too. I was 16 when everything changed for me. I lived in a quiet part of town called Oak Ridge, Minnesota. It was the kind of place where you knew your neighbors by their dogs' names and kids rode their bikes until dark without worry. My parents had bought our house back in the 1990s, when houses were still cheap on the edges of town. Behind our backyard fence stood a thick wall of trees, and beyond that, you could barely see an old, falling apart two-story house that everyone just called the back house. People said no one had lived there since the 1980s. Some said the owner was a person who collected too much stuff and then disappeared. Others whispered something scarier about screams heard during storms or lights flickering in the upstairs windows. But most people just said it was a house falling apart. What made it strange wasn't the house itself, but that on quiet nights you could hear something buzzing. It sounded like electricity, like power going through wires. Except the house had no power. I never paid much attention to it until one summer evening. I was sitting in my room with my window open, and I heard that crackling sound again. It was like someone turning on an old electrical box. That night, it kept going. A low shaking sound, like the house itself was charging up. I asked my dad about it the next morning at breakfast. He just shrugged his shoulders. That place hasn't had anyone living there since before you were born. It's probably just an old electrical box nearby breaking down. But we didn't have any electrical boxes behind our house. It bothered me for weeks, so I told my best friend, Ree, about it. Ree was the kind of guy who loved scary stories and haunted places. We were in the same grade and had been close friends since elementary school. "Dude, are you serious?" he said, his eyes getting bright. "Real buzzing from that empty house?" "Every night," I said. "It's too regular. Same time, around 10:30. Lasts a few minutes, then stops. We should check it out," he said. I wasn't sure. I'd thought about it myself. But the idea of actually going there, that was different. "I don't know, man. It's creepy, and my parents." "We'll be quick," he said. "In and out. I'll bring my camera. We take pictures of it. Maybe we find some old electrical stuff left behind or something cooler." I said yes. Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't want to seem scared. The next Friday after school, we packed our bags with flashlights, gloves, a camera, and 2 screwdrivers, just in case. We waited until 7 p.m. when my parents went to dinner with some friends. The sky was still light, but shadows stretched long between the trees. We slipped through the gap in the backyard fence, crawled under low-hanging branches, and found ourselves at the edge of the clearing where the back house stood. It looked worse up close. Grey paint was peeling off like dead skin. Windows were broken with dirty curtains instead of glass. The porch was sagging, and one of the support beams was cracked in half. The front door was still there, but crooked on its hinges. "Last chance," I said, half joking. "This isn't fear," Ree replied, smiling. "This is excitement, mixed with a bit of worry." Inside, the house smelled like wet insulation and something awful. Not mold, something rotting. The air felt heavier. There were dog bowls scattered across the floor, empty but stained. Some were tipped over, and there was dog food everywhere, scattered like confetti. "What the heck?" I whispered. "Who feeds dogs in an empty house?" "Maybe homeless people," Ree said, bending down to look at the dog bowls. "This one's fresh. Look, it's got crusty stuff on it." The floor creaked under our weight. We stayed close together, careful not to step on the dog food. The house groaned with age, and then from upstairs came a sound, a screeching, throat-clearing yelp, like a person trying to bark like a dog. We both froze. "We should leave," I said. "Wait," Ree whispered, raising a finger. "Listen." Then came the crackling, electricity, like something sparking to life. And then a voice. "Don't eat it, eat it." Male voice, maybe in his 40s, rough and commanding. Our brains screamed at us to go. But instead, we climbed the stairs slowly and quietly. Each step felt like it might break under us. The upstairs hallway was darker, with just enough light coming through a broken ceiling window to see shapes dot. From the room at the end, we heard it again. Eat it. Ree looked at me. I nodded. We pushed the door open, and what we saw didn't make sense. 3 people, 2 men and 1 woman, were on their hands and knees, wearing dog collars. Their wrists and ankles were stuck to the floor with thick white glue. Dried blood and bruises covered their arms and faces. They looked up with wide eyes. A 4th man, skinny and hollow-cheeked, stood in front of them holding a stun gun. "Sit," he shouted. None of them obeyed. Instead, they looked at us. Their eyes begged for help. Then the screaming started. "Help us. Get us out." The man got scared. He hit one of them with the stun gun, a sickening crack, and the body shook. "Shut up. Shut up," Ree screamed. The man turned toward us, anger twisting his face. "You shouldn't be here." He ran at us. We grabbed my arm and pushed me back, but he got caught. The man tackled him, pressing the stun gun into Ree's side. I ran out of the room, down the stairs, into the woods. My lungs burned. I jumped the fence, almost tearing my leg on the wood. I made it inside, locked the door, and called 911 with shaking hands. Then, I went back. I couldn't leave Ree behind. I grabbed my dad's old heavy flashlight made of steel. I slipped through the fence again, quieter. This time, back through the trees, back through the creaking porch. Inside the house was quieter. Too quiet. I walked on my tiptoes upstairs. In the same room, the man had just finished putting a collar around Ree's neck. His body was limp, but breathing. The man was talking to himself. "Good dogs don't scream. Good dogs don't scream." I stepped inside and swung the flashlight as hard as I could. It cracked against his shoulder and sent him falling. The stun gun slid across the floor. He tried to crawl, but I kicked him again and again. His nose bled. He wheezed. "You're not a trainer," I whispered. "You're a sick weirdo." I held the stun gun over him as sirens got closer. Police filled the house within minutes. I led them upstairs, my hands shaking. They were horrified. The victims, 2 of whom were reported missing weeks ago, were glued to the floor with super strong glue. Some had been there for days. They'd been beaten, starved, and fed only dog food. Ree was awake, but in shock. His wrists bled from trying to fight against the glue. The man, Gerald Wyland, 52 years old, was a former animal doctor helper. He got fired for being mean to animals. He had no home, no family, just a twisted obsession with keeping people as pets. When police asked why he did it, he just smiled. They were loyal. They listened better than most people. He was sentenced to life in prison. Ree got better physically, at least. He needed therapy. So did I. We never talked about the back house again. It was torn down later that year after the town council demanded it be destroyed. But even now, when the wind blows just right, I sometimes think I hear it. That low electric buzz. And I remember the look in those people's eyes. If you ever find an empty house and you think no one's inside, you might be wrong. And if you hear something you shouldn't hear, don't go in. Not all monsters live in the woods. Some are just waiting behind the walls. I didn't think I'd ever end up in a place like that. It was the kind of house you drive past and try not to look at for too long. Half out of unease, half out of guilt. Like you're being disrespectful to something that doesn't want to be remembered. I still don't know what we really saw in that place. But I know what it felt like, and I know I'll never forget it. This happened a few years ago when I was in my early 20s and trying to get my life together. I'd moved to northern Ohio for a fresh start. No big plan, just a new city, a cheap job, and enough distance from the things I didn't want to face back home. One of my oldest friends, Jordan, was already living there, and when I told him I was moving, he offered me a room. I didn't wait to say yes. The rent was almost nothing, and we already got along like brothers. The place was a small rental house on a quiet street in a town called Raven Ridge. The name sounded nice, but the town was mostly working people and old folks with a good number of houses sitting empty or falling apart. It was one of those places that had clearly seen better times. Our house was a little worn, but livable. The porch sagged slightly and the outside walls were faded, but we didn't care. We had heat, we had water, and we had enough money for pizza. And gassed out what we didn't realize at first. What we somehow didn't notice when we moved in was how bad the house directly across from us looked. It looked like a painting of something falling apart. The lawn was waist high with dry grass and sharp weeds. The windows were so dirty you couldn't see through them. One window cover hung loose and swayed when the wind picked up. A sagging chain link fence ran around the front, the gate always open, or maybe broken. The strangest thing was the way it sat, like it wasn't empty. Not exactly, just quiet. Too quiet. On our first night in the house, Jordan and I sat on the front steps, sharing a pack of cigarettes and talking about work. He was a waiter at a nearby restaurant. I just started at a thrift store downtown, putting things on shelves and dealing with junk all day. It was mid-spring, one of those crisp nights where the sky is dark blue and the stars start coming out early. I swear that place wasn't like that when I moved in, Jordan said, pointing toward the house across the street. Or maybe I just never paid attention. Looks dead, I said quietly. Like one of those homes you see on ghost tours. I bet no one's lived there in years, he said, then laughed. Or maybe there's a crazy hermit living inside and we just woke him up. We laughed about it. But I remember that moment so clearly because just as we stood up to go inside, I saw something. A shadow moved behind the top right window. I froze. Wait, what? I just saw something. Someone moved behind that window. I pointed. Jordan squinted. Where? Upstairs, the one on the right. He kept looking, but the shadow was gone. There's no way, dude, he said. The place looks like it's one bad storm away from falling down. I'm serious. You probably saw your reflection or something. But I knew I didn't. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I told myself it was nothing. I tried to let it go, but a part of me stayed worried. Over the next couple of days, we got more settled in. Jordan and I matched our work schedules, so we had evenings off together. We'd cook cheap food, play video games, or walk down to the corner gas station for snacks. The house became our safe little bubble until he showed up. The neighbor our house had only one neighbor, within a few lots. An older man named Cliff. We met him while dragging our trash cans to the curb. He wore cargo shorts and an old tie-dye shirt with long grey hair tied back and a goatee that looked like it hadn't been trimmed since the 1990s. You boys just move in? He asked with a scratchy voice. Yeah, Jordan said. Just got everything inside a few days ago. Cliff squinted at the house across the street. Keep your eyes on that one. What do you mean? I asked. It's been empty for a long time, but that doesn't mean no one's staying there. He walked off before we could ask more. That night, Jordan and I stood at our window, watching the falling apart house. I couldn't shake the neighbor's words. No one's staying there. Didn't make sense. Either someone lived there or they didn't, right? Jordan brought out his old camping binoculars. Might as well see if there's any sign of life. I took a turn and focused on the window where I'd seen the shadow. I expected to see only dirt and old curtains, but then something moved again. I jumped back. It's not in my head. Something's up there. Jordan looked next, but of course, nothing moved. He set the binoculars down. Look, I believe you. But even if someone's in there, what do we do? Call the cops. Tell them we saw a shadow. We didn't call the cops. We decided to check it out. Jordan was always the braver one. He used to break into empty buildings just for the thrill of it. I was more careful, but something about this place got under my skin. I wanted to know what was in there. I needed to see it for myself. He had an old crowbar in the garage, left over from when he briefly worked maintenance at a strip mall. We waited until it was nearly midnight. The street was dead silent. No cars, no lights. The only sound was the wind brushing through the weeds. We crept around the side of the house. The backyard was worse than the front. Half of the fence had fallen down and what was left had been covered by vines. We found a back door almost hidden under a rotting cover. The lock was rusted and the wood was soft. Jordan jammed the crowbar in and popped it open with a sickening crack. The inside smelled like mold, dust, and something else, something faintly metallic. The air was cold. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, showing peeling wallpaper, furniture covered in sheets, and thick dust coating everything. But it wasn't trashed. It wasn't vandalized. It looked like someone had left on purpose years ago, but maybe never fully left. There were photographs still on the mantel, books stacked neatly on a side table. We moved quietly through the downstairs, hearts pounding. "This feels wrong," I whispered. Jordan nodded. "It's too preserved." We found a small stairway near the kitchen, narrow steps leading into darkness. "I'll go first," he said. "You sure?" "Yeah. If anything jumps out, I've got faster legs." We both laughed nervously. He crept up slowly, one step at a time. I followed close behind. We reached the second floor and turned into the hallway. That's when we heard it. A footstep, then another, not ours. From the room at the end of the hall, Jordan raised the flashlight and crowbar, whispering, "Hello." The door at the end creaked open. We both froze. Inside the room, there was a mattress on the floor, a blanket, empty cans and bottles. Someone had been staying here, but they weren't there now. We didn't wait to find out when they'd be back. We ran. We didn't look back. We just ran all the way back to our place, slammed the door, and locked every bolt we had. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then Jordan said, "We're not calling the cops, right? What would we even say? There's a homeless person in an empty house." "You think that was a homeless person?" He didn't answer. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, we saw Cliff sitting on his porch. He had a coffee in one hand and a cigarette in the other. We walked over carefully. "We went inside last night," I told him. He didn't react much, just stared at the street. "You ever actually see someone in there?" Jordan asked. Cliff nodded slowly. "When I was a kid, the house was normal. Family lived there. A couple, 2 daughters. Then one of the girls disappeared. They never found her. Her parents moved away a year later. That was what, 40 years ago. Are you saying it's haunted?" I asked. He shrugged. "I'm saying people go in, but I've never seen anyone come out." That evening, I saw the window again, but this time, there were 2 faces, just standing, staring, one tall, one small. I backed away from the curtain. "Jordan," I whispered. He came over, looked through the window. "I don't see." "Wait, no, dude, that's real." The faces moved out of view. We packed that night. Didn't wait, didn't argue. Just loaded up our cars with what we could, and left the keys in the mailbox. The landlord never asked why. We found a small place across town. Paid a little more, drove a little farther, but we never looked back. Years later, I drove through Raven Ridge again, just passing through. I made the mistake of turning onto that old street. The house was still there, still silent, still watching. But now the curtains were open, and someone was standing in the doorway watching me. I didn't stop, I didn't wave. I just kept driving, and I'll never ever go back. In high school, I used to spend weekends taking pictures of dead malls and storm drains with my friend Lydia. We'd sneak into crumbling buildings on the edges of our town, places most people forgot even existed. I guess I've always been drawn to empty things. There's something about them, still full of stories, even if no one's telling them anymore. When I came to Northvale University last year, it didn't take me long to hear about Briar Hall. It's this half-collapsed dorm tucked behind the campus garden area, separated from the rest of the university by a rusted chain-link fence and 2 decades of dust. Students say it was closed down 15 years ago after a mold outbreak. Others whisper it was something darker. A student suicide, a fire, a faculty scandal. I didn't care much about the rumors at first. They sounded like typical campus folklore. But a few weeks ago, while working late in the media lab, a senior named Felix mentioned it again. Back when I was a freshman, he told me, sipping lukewarm vending machine coffee. Some idiot tried to live stream himself doing an overnight in Briar. His phone feed cut out and they found him screaming and bloody in the woods the next morning. He said he saw something he couldn't explain. He laughed like it was no big deal, but there was a tightness in his voice that planted the seed. I started researching, digging through old online forums, old campus newspapers. even trying to sweet-talk one of the maintenance guys during a smoke break outside the cafeteria. The official story was mold, but there was a 6-month gap in the public record before the building was condemned. No repair logs, no inspection reports, no details, just gone. I couldn't stop thinking about it. So, last Thursday night, around 1:30 a.m., I made up my mind to go in. I didn't tell anyone, not even Lydia, who transferred to UCLA. I knew she'd freak out. I just grabbed my backpack, GoPro, flashlight, and a crowbar I borrowed from the storage closet in the media building. I dressed in black, left my dorm window cracked so I could sneak back in without scanning my student ID. The moon was low, the air was cool, and the campus was mostly dead. Getting to Briar was easier than I expected. The fence behind the garden area had a loose panel already bent open at the bottom, like someone else had used it recently. That should have been a red flag. The building stood in front of me like a corpse. 4 stories of broken windows and sagging wood. A massive "Do Not Enter" sign was nailed across the front double doors, but I found a boarded up window on the side that someone had already pried loose. I finished the job and slipped inside. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It wasn't mold. It was old food, wet stone, rust, and something else. Something sweet and thick, like dried blood. I stood in what used to be a common room. Graffiti covered the walls. Names, dates, symbols. Some were crude jokes, but others looked ritualistic. I turned on my GoPro and clipped it to my chest. "All right," I whispered to the camera. "This is Isaac Kim inside Briar Hall. It's now 2:07 a.m. and I'm alone." I wasn't even sure who I was talking to. Most of the upper floors had collapsed stairwells, so I didn't bother with those. Instead, I made my way through the first floor toward the basement door, flashlight sweeping left to right, catching decades of dust and peeling paint. At one point, I passed an old corkboard still clinging to the wall. The papers on it were yellowed, and water-damaged flyers for long-past dorm events, club meetings, and a faded missing student notice. Her name was Marissa Halbrook. The date, October 2010. The basement door was rusted shut, but a good kick forced it open. I took a breath. Going down, I muttered to no one. Flashlight in one hand, crowbar in the other. Each step creaked under my weight as I went down. The air grew noticeably colder. The darkness thickened. At the bottom of the stairs was a heavy steel door. It wasn't locked, just slightly open. I pushed it open, and that's when everything changed. The room looked clean. That was the first strange thing. Unlike the rest of the building, this space wasn't covered in filth or junk. The tiles were grey, the walls were concrete. The air had a faint metallic smell. It looked like an old utility room, maybe a laundry facility. But there was something wrong with the floor. It was wet, not puddled, not soaked, but sticky. I knelt to get a closer look and immediately pulled back. The red sheen coating the tiles wasn't water, it was blood. A low gurgle echoed from the far side of the room. I shined my light toward it and nearly screamed. There was a drain in the floor, half covered in glistening clumps of something fibrous and organic hair. Skin, a shredded t-shirt. Above it, mounted to the ceiling, was a large black pentagram, not painted, carved into the stone. My flashlight flickered, and in that second of darkness, I swear I saw something standing in the corner. Not a person, not an animal, something in between. I ran, no hesitation. I bolted up the stairs, the flashlight bouncing wildly, crashing into the walls as I gasped for air. I barely made it out through the side window before I tripped and landed hard on the dirt. I didn't stop running until I was back at the dorm, heart pounding like a jackhammer. When I got back to my room, it was nearly 4 a.m. I sat on the floor, shaking, tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was staged. Maybe some weird performance art student set it up. Maybe I imagined it all. I peeled off my shirt and realized my chest felt warm. I looked down and saw 5 small scratches across my ribs, like something had tried to grab me. I didn't sleep. not even after the sun came up. Around 11 a.m., after my roommate left for class, I found an envelope slipped under the door. No name, no return address. Inside was a piece of paper. One sentence written in red ink. "You weren't supposed to see that. I haven't told anyone. Not even Lydia. I haven't gone back. But sometimes at night, I hear faint scratching on the window. And this morning, when I turned on my phone, I found a photo in my camera roll I didn't take. It's me standing in the basement, the pentagram behind me, and something crawling out of the drain." I was never someone who believed in ghost stories. Not really. I mean, I liked them, sure. I grew up listening to creepy tales around backyard. Fires nodding along while someone exaggerated how they swear they saw something in an old house. But deep down, I always thought it was just part of the fun. That changed in October 2023. This happened in our town. Briar Glen, a quiet, medium-sized place tucked between two larger cities in Illinois. Just enough people to keep Walmart busy, but small enough that everyone hears the same rumors. And for over 20 years, there was always one rumor that stuck. The empty house on Larkspur Trail. It sat way off the road, down a mostly forgotten gravel path that used to be a driveway. The house had been empty since the late 1990s. No one knew much about the people who used to live there. Some said that the owner died and the family couldn't afford to keep it. Others claimed something darker happened, like a murder, suicide, or a disappearance. You'd hear a different version depending on who you asked. What I knew was that no one ever bought the place. Over time, the woods took it back. Trees swallowed the path, vines wrapped the porch columns, and moss crept up the walls. Eventually, people just stopped talking about it altogether. Out of sight, out of mind. Except not for me. I've always been obsessed with empty places. Not for attention or social media, just pure curiosity. There's something about stepping into a space frozen in time, like walking through a memory that doesn't belong to you. I'd explored old train stations, crumbling motels, even an empty hospital once. But this house, this one, was practically in my backyard. And weirdly, I'd never gone. Not until that day. It was a Thursday, mid-October. I'd had the day off work. My boss at the cafe called to say our coffee machine was down, and there was no point in coming in. I'd been restless all morning, scrolling my phone and pacing the apartment. It was cold outside, but sunny in that brittle autumn way, where the light has a yellowed, almost haunted tone. I texted a couple of friends I usually explore with, but nobody was free. Still, I couldn't shake the urge. Something in me said, "Go now," and I listened. I packed a small backpack flashlight, water, pepper spray, portable charger, and threw on a hoodie and jeans. I left my car at the corner store 2 blocks away, and walked the rest of the way through the woods. It was strange how familiar and unfamiliar it felt at the same time. I'd driven past Larkspur Trail so many times growing up, but standing at the edge of it now, it felt like entering a place I wasn't supposed to be. The old gravel driveway was barely visible, more grass than road now. I walked for several minutes through thickening trees, the canopy above dimming the light. There was a sudden drop in temperature as I got deeper into the woods. Like the sun had decided this place wasn't worth warming. Finally, I saw it. The house stood still and broken, leaning slightly like one of its supports had started to give. The house was 2 floors tall and made of wood. The porch was falling down and the windows were broken. What I noticed most was how quiet it was. No birds singing, no wind blowing, just the sound of my boots stepping on dry leaves. I walked up slowly, pointing my flashlight into the dark windows. I saw spider webs, furniture turned over, old wallpaper peeling off the walls, but nothing moving. I listened for 30 seconds, something I always do before going into any empty place. You can learn a lot from being quiet and listening. Then I walked toward the front door. It was open, just a crack. This wasn't surprising after so many years, but something about the way it was hanging there, like someone had just touched it, made my stomach feel tight and scared. I stepped inside. The first thing I smelled was old wood, wet and moldy stuff, and something that smelled like metal, like rust or old dried blood. The living room still had furniture in it. There was an old couch with flowers on it that was falling apart, a broken coffee table, and a few picture frames hanging crooked on the walls. One had fallen and broken. The photo inside was too faded to see what it was. I whispered to myself, "This place is really scary." I tried to make myself feel better by talking out loud. Sometimes that helped when I was nervous. I walked from room to room, keeping my flashlight steady and my footsteps quiet. The kitchen still had dirty dishes in the sink. A kid's drawing was stuck to the refrigerator with an old yellow magnet. Everything was covered in dust, but nothing had been touched, in a way that made it feel like whoever lived here had just disappeared one day. The first floor was small, only a few rooms. I took a deep breath and walked toward the stairs. Each step made a loud creaking sound when I stepped on it. I stopped halfway up and bounced a little to see if the stairs were strong enough. They barely held my weight. At the top was a narrow hallway with two doors. One was open, one was closed. I went to the open one first. It was empty. No furniture, no personal stuff, just torn carpet and paint that had faded from the sun. I stepped inside and looked around quickly with my flashlight. Nothing strange. That's when I heard the loud thud sound. It came from downstairs. It was a solid, heavy noise, not like a house making normal settling sounds, not like wind. It was specific. It sounded like a boot hitting the floor. I froze and didn't move. My heart started beating really fast in my chest. My brain screamed at me, "Leave now." And I always told myself, at the first sign of anything weird, get out. I turned back toward the stairs, moving fast, but trying to be quiet. My flashlight flickered once, just for a second, then came back on. Probably the battery's getting weak. Probably. I got to the bottom of the stairs and looked around. Everything looked the same. Still quiet, still cold, but something was different. The front door was shut tight. I stopped walking completely. I absolutely knew, that I had left it wide open. I felt cold fear creep through my body like icy water. My throat became dry. I ran to the door, grabbed the handle, and pulled. It wouldn't move. I yanked harder. Still nothing. It was locked, or someone had put a bolt on it from the outside. That was when I spun around, my flashlight shaking in my hand, looking at the living room, the kitchen, the stairway. Every part of me screamed, "Run!" But there was nowhere to run to. I rushed to the broken window I had looked through earlier, climbing through. It was harder than I thought it would be. Glass caught my hoodie and ripped the fabric. I scraped my leg on the wooden frame, but I made it outside. I landed in the dirt and ran as fast as I could into the woods, not even using my flashlight. I didn't want anyone to see me. My lungs hurt from running so hard. My breath made fog. In the cold air, I didn't stop running until I was at least a few hundred feet away from the house. Then I saw lights. At first, I thought it was someone else. Maybe the person who shut the door was coming to find me. But no, these were flashing red and blue lights from police cars. Two of them were slowly driving down the driveway toward the house, driving through the grass like they had done this before. I hid behind a tree and watched from far away. The cars stopped just before the porch. One police officer got out with his flashlight ready. The other one followed him. They said something to each other, but they were too far away for me to hear, and they slowly went into the house. They weren't rushing. They didn't seem surprised to be there. That's what scared me the most. It was like they knew they would have to come here. I waited. Maybe a minute, maybe 3 minutes, I don't know. Then I turned and ran all the way home. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next day, I tried to find anything about police going to Larkspur Trail. Nothing. No crime reports. No newspaper story. No Facebook rumors. I looked for days and weeks. Still nothing. It's been 2 years now, and even today, nothing was ever said about what happened in that house. I've never gone back there. I still drive by the road sometimes, just to see if the house is gone, or if the city shut it down. It isn't. It's still there. And now, I wonder, was I the first person to go in there, or the last person to come out? I've never told anyone this whole story. Not until now. Not because I'm scared people won't believe me, but because I still don't know what I walked into that day. or who locked the door behind me. It all started because I was bored. Really, really bored on a weeknight. The kind of bored that only happens when everything in your life is just okay enough to feel trapped by it. It was fall of 2017, and I was living in a falling apart apartment on the 3rd floor in a medium-sized city in Indiana with my 2 roommates, Miles and Deshaun. The 3 of us were in our last semester at Purdue Fort Wayne. We had been through a lot together, staying up late to study, working long shifts, breakups, hangovers, and all the thousands of little personal failures that come with being in your 20s and not quite being who you thought you'd be by now. We weren't exactly thrill seekers, but we all had this weird love for places that time had forgotten about. Old buildings, train yards, half-sunk motels, that kind of thing. It wasn't about chasing ghosts or making TikTok videos. It was more about that spooky peace you feel in ruins, walking where people's lives once happened and realizing how easily things can just disappear. We had been exploring since our 2nd year of college, but it had always been safe stuff. An old diner that was closed down, a flooded skate rink, an old hotel lobby full of pigeons and moldy smell. This time though, we were looking for something bigger, something worth remembering. That's when Deshaun told us about the factory. "Hey," he said on a boring Thursday night, leaning over our kitchen counter with his phone screen lighting up his face. "You guys ever hear about the old steel mill out by Kessler?" I looked up from my laptop. "Kessler, like 40 minutes away, Kessler." "Yeah, out past the river bridge." My cousin Jamal said he and his friends went there a few years ago. Said it's huge, like several floors, walkways up high, machinery still in there. The place got shut down in the 90s and nobody has touched it since. He promised there was an entire floor underground. Miles raised an eyebrow. "And they didn't get arrested?" "Nah, the place doesn't even have a fence around it anymore. Just a broken old gate and a bunch of signs that say no trespassing." We were all quiet for a moment. Then I said what we were all thinking. "Let's go tomorrow night, Friday night." October 27th, 11:12 p.m. We parked about half a mile from the factory down a side road full of weeds and broken glass. The city ended suddenly out here. Streetlights gave way to huge fields, junk lots, and old warehouses too stubborn to fall down. The kind of place where even the crickets seemed to whisper. Our car, Miles's dented white Civic, was practically invisible in the dark. We packed light. Just a few flashlights, a couple energy drinks, our phones, and a portable speaker in Deshaun's backpack, though we never ended up using it. I'll be honest, I was nervous. Not scared, not yet. But that weird feeling of dread you get before something bad happens sat like a stone in my stomach. It always does, right before you step into something wrong. The factory came into view slowly as we walked down the cracked road. This huge, scary hulk of rusted steel and shadows. 4 stories high, maybe 5. Broken windows looked like missing teeth. Part of the roof had fallen in on one side, and the brick walls were covered in graffiti tags from who knows when. A collapsed loading dock had fallen behind piles of twisted metal. We stopped at the front. 2 enormous steel doors. One of them cracked open slightly like a mouth waiting to speak. Deshaun broke the silence. "You guys hear that?" We all stood still and listened. There was a low humming sound, not like a machine humming, more like wind echoing through a long tunnel, faint and hollow. "Probably just wind," I said, but I was lying. The moment we stepped inside, the air changed. It wasn't just cold. It was still, that weird kind of still, like the building itself was holding its breath. Our flashlights cut across a massive room full of rusting machines, conveyor belts, and broken walkways up high. Dust swirled in the air. The metal made faint groaning sounds with the wind, and every step we took echoed like it was trying to wake something up. "I'm getting serious Silent Hill vibes," Miles said quietly. I forced myself to laugh, but yeah, he wasn't wrong. We wandered around the ground floor for a while, stepping over old wooden pallets, buckets of who knows what, and stained blueprints still pinned to the wall. A narrow staircase led up to a walkway, and I climbed up while the guys checked out. An office on the far end. From up top, I could see everything. Endless rows of machinery and conveyor belts stretched below me. Far ahead, a section of floor looked like it had collapsed, creating a black hole into what had to be the basement. I was about to call out to the guys when I heard a metallic clang behind me. I whipped around, my light moving wildly. "Nothing there, guys," I called. My voice felt swallowed up by the silence. I heard Miles faintly. "Yo, you okay?" "Yeah. I thought I heard something." I walked back across the walkway and climbed down. The others were in the office room, dust-covered desks, chairs turned over, and an old rotary phone still bolted to the wall. Someone had carved "run" into the desk in jagged lines. Deshawn was holding a moldy manila folder full of inspection logs. "Yo, this place shut down in '97. There was a fire in one of the wings. That's why the buildings all burned on the north end." "Any people hurt?" I asked. "Doesn't say," Miles added. "I looked up news reports last night. Couldn't find a single article about it." That was the first time we really felt something was off. It didn't make sense. A fire that big, in a building this size, and nothing online about it. We kept going deeper into the factory, heading toward the side with the collapsed floor. Our lights caught glimpses of weird things. Half-melted hard hats, burnt boots, a kid's drawing pinned to a wall in an employee locker room. It showed a stick figure falling into black scribbles. The name Darren was written in crayon at the bottom. At the far end of the room, we found the hole. A metal staircase, rusted and half missing, led down into complete darkness. "Basement?" Miles asked. "Only one way to find out," I replied, already feeling bad about it. The air down there was thick, wet, and smelled terrible, like mildew mixed with rust and something far more gross and organic. Our flashlights flickered sometimes, even though they had fresh batteries. There were rows of old machinery down there, but more importantly, there were signs that someone had been there recently. Fresh footprints in the dust, a lit candle in a glass jar still burning, a chair positioned in the corner facing the wall, a mattress, a dirty pile of clothes, and a rope hanging from a beam overhead, frayed and recently cut. "Okay," Deshawn said in a tight voice. "We're not alone down here." I nodded slowly, back upstairs. Now, then we heard it. Heavy breathing from the darkness behind one of the machines. He stepped out slowly, as if he was waiting for us to notice him. He had no shoes on, wearing torn thermal underwear and a jacket covered in soot. His face was hollow, with long hair and a patchy beard. One eye was milky white, like it had gone blind, and he was smiling. Deshawn whispered, "Don't run." The man took a step forward, then jumped at us. We ran. Miles screamed, and I heard something clatter behind me. I didn't look back. We flew up the stairs, slipping on the rusted steps. The man was screaming behind us now, wild animal-like shrieks that echoed off the walls. Back on the main floor, I didn't see Miles. "Where's Miles?" I shouted. "He went the other way," Deshawn cried. We turned to run, but there he was again. The man was in front of us. How the hell did he get there? We didn't wait to figure it out. We ducked into a side hallway, slammed a door, and ran down a narrow corridor that led past the break room and into a back storage room. There were stairs up to a second-level walkway and a rusted metal emergency door near the top. We ran and didn't stop or think. We exploded through the emergency door into cold night air. Miles was already outside, breathing hard and bleeding from a cut on his forehead. "You okay?" I managed to ask. He nodded. He had a knife. Then did. "You see, how did he get in front of us?" None of us had an answer. We ran to the car, locked the doors, and sat there in silence for a long time. We didn't call the cops. What would we even say? There's a wild man living in an abandoned factory who somehow defies logic. A few weeks later, the city announced they were going to tear down the old Kessler mill. They said it was falling apart and not safe. Nothing was mentioned about the man. Nothing about missing people. No news, no updates, no trace. We never went back. Sometimes I think about how quiet it was before he appeared, how he waited until we were alone, how I still hear that faint breathing in my dreams. And I wonder how many other people heard it too, but never made it back out. I didn't grow up in an exciting place, just a small, quiet town in northern Ohio called Ridgeview. It was the kind of town where everyone knew each other, or at least knew about each other. Nothing big ever happened there. Time sort of stopped. By the time I was 16, I had already memorized every street, every gas station, every shortcut to school, and every crack in the sidewalks near my neighborhood. But even in a place like Ridgeview, there were whispers and rumors, and for as long as I could remember, the one place people stayed away from was a rotting, half-hidden church deep on the edge of town. Some people just called it St. Lillian's, but most of us called it simply the Hollow Church. It hadn't held a church service in over 20 years, and no one knew exactly why. Some said there had been a fire, others said there was a murder, but those were just rumors passed down from older kids trying to scare us. What was real, though, was the uneasy feeling people got around it, even from the street. My best friend at the time was a guy named Elijah. We'd been close since middle school. He lived just a few blocks over, and was basically the only person I felt really understood me. We both liked old horror movies, drawing weird stuff in notebooks, and most of all, we loved urban exploring. Not for YouTube or anything, just for us. It was our escape from school, work, parents, and Ridgeview's bone-dry boredom. This story happened during winter break. It was our junior year, December 2019. Everything was grey. Dead leaves everywhere, no snow yet, but the cold had that sharp sting in the air like something was coming. That morning, Elijah texted me, "You awake? I'm bored as hell. Let's go somewhere." I remember staring at the message from my bed for a while. I'd been in a weird mood for days, restless and anxious for no reason. Maybe it was just the break, giving me too much time to think, but still I replied, "Yeah, come pick me up." 20 minutes later, he pulled up in his beat-up sedan with gas station snacks and his backpack that always had a flashlight, a GoPro that was half broken, and a crowbar just in case. We didn't even have a plan. At first, we just drove around like usual, playing music loud and watching Ridgeview crawl by. But then, Elijah brought it up. "You ever actually been near the Hollow Church?" he asked casually. I turned down the music. "Not really, just seen it from the road like everyone else." He grinned, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. "Want to change that today?" I hesitated. Something about it felt wrong, but the part of me that needed anything different, anything interesting, said, "Yes, let's do it." The road leading to the church was barely even a road anymore. It started as cracked pavement, but eventually became moss, vines, and frostbitten weeds. The trees on either side looked like skeletons, their branches brushing the car like long fingers. We parked a little ways off, near an old utility post that was missing its sign. No other cars, no other people, just the sound of wind moving dead leaves around. I should have turned back then. Something in my stomach was already telling. Me too. Elijah grabbed his flashlight and handed me one, too. "We good?" I nodded, pulling my coat tighter. "Let's make it quick." We walked the rest of the way on foot. As we got closer, the church came into full view, and it was worse than I remembered. Tall, wooden, and blackened in places by old soot or rot. The tall, pointy part at the top looked like it had been partially crushed or had collapsed years ago. Ivy had taken over the left side, curling in and out of the broken, colored glass windows. The front doors hung crooked, as if they'd been forced open too many times. The whole place looked like it had been forgotten by both people and time. "Scary as hell," Elijah said quietly, but he sounded more impressed than scared. We slipped through a gap in the rusted iron fence that surrounded it. Our boots crunched against frost and broken twigs. The closer we got, the quieter everything seemed. No birds, no cars, not even the wind anymore. I was about to suggest we leave when Elijah pushed open the heavy front door. It groaned like a dying animal. Inside was darkness and silence. We turned on our flashlights. The main hall was long, lined with wooden benches that were coated in dust, but strangely still in good shape. No graffiti, no trash, No signs of homeless people or party kids. Just untouched silence, like the building itself was holding its breath. We walked slowly down the center aisle. Our lights moved across old hymn books, a broken candle holder, and the faint outlines of paintings above the altar. Angels, saints, something painted in dark colors I couldn't make out. Creepy but kind of beautiful, Elijah whispered. We reached the pulpit and he stepped up onto it like it was a stage. You think anyone ever preached some real fire and brimstone stuff here? He joked, holding up his flashlight like a microphone. Cut it out, I said quietly. I couldn't laugh. I felt like someone was watching us. That's when the sound came, a thud, sharp and distant, but from inside the building, maybe from one of the side rooms. We both froze completely. You hear that? I asked. Elijah nodded slowly, lowering his flashlight. We turned together toward a small door on the left wall. It looked like it might have led to a back office or maybe storage. My mouth went dry. Every instinct in me said to leave, but Elijah started walking toward it, so I followed. The door wasn't locked. It creaked open, showing a narrow hallway, lined with old Sunday school drawings, faded crayon pictures of stick-figure kids holding hands with angels. It was oddly sweet and deeply unsettling at the same time. At the end of the hall was another door. Elijah opened it and we stepped inside. This room was different. Still no graffiti, but colder. The walls were lined with bookshelves full of Bibles, hymn books, and old record books. In the corner was a desk that had been tipped over, papers scattered everywhere, and behind it, chairs stacked neatly in piles and boxes. We looked around quietly for a few minutes, still not speaking, both on edge. Then we heard it again. Footsteps, not fast. Slow and deliberate, coming from the main church hall. Elijah's eyes went wide. We both turned off our lights and crouched down instinctively. Through the crack of the door, we could just barely see movement, something passing by the aisle. It was a person. At least it looked like a person. They didn't speak or call out, just walked silently down the aisle and out the front door. Then the door creaked shut. We waited, silent, not even breathing. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, Elijah whispered, "Was that a cop? Someone living here?" I shook my head. No flashlight, no sound, no nothing. We stayed there longer than we probably needed to, too scared to move. When we finally did, we ran out of that church, like our lives depended on it. But here's the thing. When I looked back at the pulpit right before the front door closed behind us, I saw something. A figure standing at the exact spot Elijah had been just 20 minutes earlier. But Elijah was right next to me. I didn't say anything until we got to the car, and even then, I wasn't sure what I had seen. Weeks passed. We didn't talk about the church. Elijah pretended like it was nothing special. But I knew he felt the same way I did, like something had followed us home. He started sleeping with the light on. He never admitted that, but his mum told my mum. One night, a few weeks later, I got a call from him. "Don't hang up," he said. "What's wrong?" I asked. "I think someone's outside my house." My heart dropped. "I saw them in the yard," he whispered. Tall, completely still, not moving, just watching. The call dropped. I called back 5 times. No answer. I rode my bike to his house, in the middle of the night. No one was outside, but his bedroom light was off. The next day, he said I had imagined it. Said he never called me, showed me his call log. There was nothing there, but I still had the missed call from him. Time-stamped 1:47 a.m. He never talked about the church again after that. I never went back. And now, 5 years later, I still can't explain it. Maybe it was just a person. Maybe not. But something was inside St. Lillian's that night. And whatever it was, it never wanted to leave. It runs behind the industrial park on the edge of West Haven, a mostly forgotten neighborhood outside of Dayton, Ohio. The houses lining that block are barely hanging on. Overgrown lawns, windows boarded up, a couple of burned-down shells still standing, blackened and empty. I had driven past the old house on Foster more times than I could count. We always called it the Shell. Nobody really remembered when construction started or why it stopped. People said it was supposed to be a duplex, but halfway through building the second floor, all work stopped. Just stopped, completely. It became part of the neighborhood's scenery. A decaying skeleton of a thing, windows never put in, insulation rotting where the weather had beaten it down. The house had never been lived in, not even once. It was the kind of place you dared people to go into as a kid. But we didn't. Not because we were scared of ghosts or whatever, but because it just felt wrong, like walking into a collapsed lung. Fast forward to winter break of my junior year in college. I was back home in West Haven, bored out of my mind. My old high school friends Ally, Marcus, Danny, and I were all in town too. All of us kind of stuck, trying to pretend we hadn't grown apart. It was one of those cold December nights where it feels like the world is holding its breath and everything's just waiting. We were stuffed into Marcus's old Toyota Corolla, driving around town for no reason. Eating fries from the only Burger Queen still open past midnight, when Marcus, of course, brought up the shell. "Bet it's still wide open," he said, flicking a fry at the dashboard. Ally rolled her eyes. "We're not 16 anymore. Which is why we can actually do it now," he grinned. "Seriously though, let's check it out. We'll just peek around. Nobody lives down that block anyway." Danny was quiet for a moment. "Didn't someone say people sleep there? You mean like homeless people or drug addicts?" I asked. She shrugged. "Yeah, heard it from Eric. He said his cousin went there on a dare and saw candles and weird symbols or something." "Eric also said his grandma's house is haunted by a demon that speaks in Latin," Ali said. "He's full of crap." Still, none of us said no, because the truth is, we were all a little bored, a little curious, and maybe a little self-destructive. We parked 2 houses down from the shell under the only working streetlight on the block. The rest of Foster Street was swallowed in shadows. No lights in any windows, just cars parked in driveways like the owners had abandoned them, too. "Keep your voices down," Marcus whispered, already stepping onto the curb. His breath came out in clouds. We crept along the sidewalk. My boots crunched over brittle leaves that hadn't been cleared since fall. The air was cold and dry. I remember thinking about how quiet everything was. It was like the whole street had stopped moving with us. When we got close, the house looked even worse than I remembered. The wood was bent and grey. Long pieces of plastic wrap moved gently in the wind. A big chain was wrapped around the front door, but the side part, where the fake brick wall turned into bare wood, was wide open. Marcus took out a flashlight, but Ally hit his arm. "You dummy, use your phone. That thing is like a bright lighthouse." We went inside through the side opening. The moment I stepped in, I smelled it. It was like wet wood, mold, and something else, maybe pee. It was sharp and sour, like an animal had peed all over the inside and then died in it. My eyes started to water a little. "Oh no," I said quietly. Inside the house felt wrong. The kind of wrong you can't see, but you feel it. The front room had no walls, just bare wood pieces and trash everywhere. There were beer cans and a broken mirror. I think there was a mattress in one corner. It was folded up, like someone tried to use it as a couch. Danny grabbed my arm. "Why is it so cold in here? Colder than outside." She was right. You could feel the cold like fingers touching your back. We split up because that's what we always did. Marcus and Ally went up the shaky stairs. I stayed with Danny to look around the main floor. We moved slowly, shining our phone lights around. We stepped carefully over broken boards and piles of broken wall pieces. There was a hallway that went to the back of the house. At the end of it was a door. "Basement?" Danny asked. I nodded, probably. The door was closed, but not locked. When I turned the handle, it opened easily. The smell got much worse. I almost threw up. "Don't go down there," Danny said quickly. "I have a bad feeling." "I'll just look," I said, not really sure why. The basement stairs were narrow and not finished. No rail to hold onto. Just a light bulb hanging from a wire at the bottom. It was turned off. I shined my light down. The floor looked like concrete, but it had stains on it. Brown spots that looked like dried blood. The air was thick and wet. I took one step down, then another. I heard a sound behind me. Footsteps. I turned around fast, thinking it was Danny, but no one was there. "Danny," I whispered. Nothing. The bulb at the bottom blinked once, even though it wasn't turned on, like a dying firefly. And then I saw something. No, someone sitting in the far corner. A shape bent down low to the ground, arms wrapped around knees, long hair like a curtain. I couldn't move. I know what being scared feels like. I've had panic attacks. I've felt really worried. But this was different. This was old, deep fear. My body screamed at me to move, to run, but I couldn't. The woman or girl lifted her head slowly. Her face was dark with shadow, but I saw her eyes, too big, too still. She didn't look confused or scared. She looked like she had been waiting for me. Then I heard screaming upstairs. It was loud and scared. It was Ally, Danny's voice. Came down the hallway. That was enough. I ran up the steps, slammed the basement door behind me, and ran. I passed Danny in the hallway as we both ran toward the front. Marcus came running down the stairs, his flashlight moving wildly. "Out, out, out," he shouted. "Go." We didn't ask questions. We didn't stop until we were in the car with the doors locked and the engine running. Marcus drove away so fast, we slid against the curb. We didn't talk for a minute. We just sat in shocked silence, trying to catch our breath. "What happened?" I finally asked, breathing hard. Marcus ran his hand through his hair, shaking. We went upstairs. Ally saw something in the bedroom. Two men just standing there in the dark, not moving. They were just staring like they were waiting for us. They had stuff on the floor. "What stuff?" Ally whispered. "Candles, bags." I don't know. One of them started walking toward us, and I ran. I looked at them. There was someone in the basement, too. A woman. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She was just there. We drove until we got to the gas station by the highway. We sat under bright lights, trying to calm down. I haven't been back to West Haven since that winter. I changed colleges and moved 3 states away. Sometimes I look up the house on Google Maps. As of 2022, it's still there, still. Not finished. Same empty frame, like it's waiting. I've read about weird ceremonies, scary stories, and things that pretend to be human until they get close enough. I don't know if we stopped something we weren't supposed to see, or if the house itself is just cursed. Some places don't want people to come in. Some things should stay unfinished. All I know is this: you couldn't pay me enough money to ever go back. I never wanted to go. That's the first thing I need to say. I wasn't trying to prove anything or make friends that badly. But when you're a new student trying to join a club at a school like Redwood State University, saying no isn't really a choice. Not if you want to be accepted. This story happened in the fall of 2017, when the air started getting cold and the trees all over Knox County were just starting to drop their gold and red leaves. It was a Friday night, 2 weeks before Halloween. Our group of about 9 new students were told we had a tradition to follow. We had to drive out to the edge of the next town over to an old mental hospital everyone called Ridgeway Hollow. It had been closed since the early 1990s, and if you ask the people who lived there, they'll tell you it should have been torn down years ago. But for some reason, it still stands. It's tucked behind a broken fence, surrounded by thick trees and a dried-up creek. It's hidden from the road, like it's hiding from the world. The night we went was completely black. No moon, barely any stars. I remember looking up from the passenger seat of my friend's car and thinking how dead the sky looked. We were supposed to meet at a small gravel parking lot next to an old park trail about a mile from Ridgeway. The club made sure we parked far enough away that the police wouldn't notice a bunch of cars and get curious. I was squeezed into the back seat with Eric, Ravi, and Drew, Noah. My closest friend in the group was driving. Noah was the kind of guy who always looked calm, like nothing ever bothered him. That night though, I noticed his jaw was tight and his hands were gripping the steering wheel hard. He hadn't said much since we left school. "Are you okay?" I asked. Leaning forward, he nodded slowly. "Yeah, I just had a weird dream about this place last night. Probably just nerves. We parked last. Our headlights cut through the trees before Noah turned them off. The silence that followed was loud, like the woods themselves were listening. Everyone gathered at the trailhead. No flashlights, no loud talking. Just phone screens glowing like fireflies as we waited for Paul. This is Ridgeway Hollow. People around here call it that because they say the whole area sinks down like a bowl. Once you're in, you feel it like gravity is stronger there. It's tradition for every new group to visit the second floor and sign the patient board. That's it. Don't steal anything. Don't mess around too much. Just in and out. What's the board for? Ravi asked. Paul smiled. It used to be the board where nurses would write names of new patients. You'll see, half the names on there belong to ghosts. A few of the guys laughed. I didn't. We walked through the trail in a single line. The path was narrow and slippery with dead leaves. I was behind Noah, who kept looking back at me like he didn't like having me behind him. I don't know why that stuck with me. After 20 minutes, the trail turned sharply left. Through the woods, a low wire fence, half fallen down, marked the edge of Ridgeway's property. The building appeared out of the dark like it had grown from the earth. Its windows were broken and the roof was falling down. It was taller than I expected. 4 floors. Not counting the basement, someone whispered, "Holy cow," behind me. The main entrance was chained shut, but Paul led us around to the east side where a basement window had been broken open years ago. It looked just wide enough for someone to crawl through. "Who goes first?" he asked. Noah stepped up. "I'll do it." He went in without a word, his feet dragging as he disappeared into the dark. One by one, we followed. I was third, and as I lowered myself down into the building, I felt it. The air changed. It was colder inside, wet even, like the walls were sweating. We ended up in a long tiled hallway with doors on both sides. Most were shut. A few hung open, showing rooms filled with turned-over beds, rusty medical carts, and broken light fixtures. Hanging like broken teeth. The smell was hard to describe. Mold, decay, dust, but also something faintly chemical, like old bleach. "This way," Paul whispered, raising his phone light. We followed him upstairs to the second floor. That's where things changed. The walls there were cleaner, less decay, and the silence was thick, like the building had swallowed sound itself. The moment we got to the landing, Ravi's phone light flickered, then died. The others followed, like someone had cut the power to our phones. Except there was no power. "What's going on?" Eric said quietly. "Stay calm," Paul said. "It happens sometimes. Metal in the walls messes with signals. Just stick together." He led us to the nurse's station at the center of the second floor. Behind the cracked glass, we saw the patient board. It was warped and faded, but still attached to the wall. I squinted. There were dozens of names on it, written in permanent marker. Most of them looked recent. "Take a marker," Paul said, handing one to Ravi. "Make your mark." Everyone signed in silence. One by one, they left their names in a small corner of that board. I didn't want to, but when the marker came to me, I signed. Issachar then handed it to Noah. He hesitated. "What if it's true?" he said quietly. "What is?" I asked. Noah didn't answer. He just signed and stepped back. That's when we heard it. A dragging sound from down the hall. It wasn't like footsteps. It was slower, like something being pulled across the floor. Paul looked toward it, phone light raised. "Stay here." He moved toward the sound. "No way," Noah said. "I'm not splitting up." He followed and I followed him. A few more did, but I wasn't paying attention to who. I kept my eyes on Paul's light ahead of us. The hallway was lined with doors, all numbered. Room 207, 208, 209. The dragging stopped. Paul stopped in front of room 210. He whispered, "That's where it came from." The door was shut. He reached for the handle. I don't know how to explain what happened next. The moment his hand touched the knob, every door in that hallway slammed shut at the exact same time. Every single one. Boom. I jumped. Someone behind me screamed. Noah grabbed my arm and I could feel him shaking. I turned to say something, And then we heard it. A woman's scream from behind that door. It wasn't quiet. It wasn't far away. It was like she was standing right on the other side, screaming like her throat was being ripped open. Paul backed away fast. "Go," he shouted. Now everyone ran. We didn't stick together. Some guys went back toward the stairs. Others ran down a side hall. I stayed close to Noah, and we ran back the way we came, back down to the first floor. My lungs were burning, and my legs were about to give out. Somewhere behind us, we heard something running. It wasn't footsteps, not human ones. More like claws on tile. We reached the basement. The window we came through was just ahead. Noah pushed me forward. "Go. I'll watch behind us." I crawled through, scraping my back. As I landed outside, I turned, and Noah wasn't coming. "Come on," I shouted. Then I saw him, frozen, staring back down the hallway. Something was coming fast. Noah. He scrambled to the window just in time. As he pulled himself through, something slammed into the wall behind him. It was loud enough to shake the ground. We didn't wait. We ran like crazy through the woods, barely able to see. I tripped once, fell on my knees, and tore a hole in my jeans. I didn't care. I just got back up and kept going. By the time we reached the parking lot, 4 guys were already there. One was crying. Another was throwing up behind a tree. We waited and waited. Eventually, everyone made it back, except for Paul. We called his phone. No answer. We drove around the woods with our headlights on for nearly an hour. No sign of him. At one point, Ravi thought he saw someone standing near the edge of the trees. But when we went to look, there was nothing there. We drove back to school in silence. The club president called the cops the next morning. They searched Ridgeway and found Paul's phone, cracked, in room 210. They never found him. The case went cold. The club said they didn't know anything. And the next group of new students, still, went. As for me, I left the club the next week. I changed schools the next term. I've never been near Ridgeway Hollow again. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear her screaming. And worse, sometimes I think I hear Paul screaming with her. It started out as a joke. Not a good one, not a funny one. Just the kind of dumb thing bored teenagers do when the summer gets too long, the nights too quiet, and boredom itches under your skin like tiny pieces of glass. Back then, I was 17 and still living in Grayson Hills, a really average suburban town in upstate Pennsylvania. I say still because even at that age, I wanted out. Everyone always says places like Grayson are safe or a good place to raise kids, but to me it felt more like a beautifully wrapped prison. The streets were lined with identical houses and trimmed bushes, and the people smiled too much without ever meaning it. It was the kind of town that made you feel crazy for wanting anything more than what was already there. My best friend at the time was Eli Moreno. He lived 2 blocks down from me on a dead-end street that went in a circle like a question no one ever answered. We'd grown up together. Same school, same soccer team, same beat-up skateboards we used to ride on the sidewalks after dark. Eli was the type who always needed something to do. He couldn't sit still. He talked fast, thought faster, and he had this gleam in his eyes, like he was always planning something dangerous. And I guess I was the dummy who always went along with it. This all happened 3 summers ago, just after we graduated high school. We'd been hanging out with our friend Casey Rivers that night. She was one of the few girls in our group. She was sarcastic, smart, and could outsmoke both of us. We'd all gone to the park behind our old middle school with a 6-pack of beer and one of those cheap Bluetooth speakers playing old Nirvana songs. By midnight, Casey left to meet her boyfriend, and Eli turned to me with that look he always got when he was about to suggest something dumb. "Let's go up to Belridge." I stopped drinking. "You're kidding." "Nope. I've got flashlights in my backpack. Come on, it's not even that far." He was talking about the Belridge house, an old sprawling property tucked behind the woods on the edge of town. Every town has that place, the one parents warn kids about, but never explain why. Some said it used to be a boarding school that burned down and was rebuilt, only to be shut down after a scandal. Others said it was just owned by some woman who lived alone and died alone in the attic. Whatever the truth, the house had been empty for as long as I could remember. It sat about a mile into the forest behind an unmarked trail. Most people in town knew about it, but few ever went. The building itself was huge. 4 floors of rotting wood and twisted vines, with a small attic tower that looked like a watching eye. Kids had gone to party there in the past, sure, but the stories that came back weren't the kind you laughed about later. People claimed they saw shadows that moved wrong, heard whispers that didn't echo right. One guy I knew said he blacked out on the 3rd floor and woke up outside with no shoes and missing 2 hours of time. I should have said no. God, I should have. But Eli just grinned and said, "Unless you're scared." And something in me hated the idea of backing down. We stopped by his place, grabbed the flashlights, and started the walk through the woods around 12:40 a.m. "Why are we even doing this?" I asked, stepping over a twisted tree root. Eli laughed. "Because it's summer. Because we're young. Because Casey ditched us, and we've got nothing better to do." I rolled my eyes, but kept walking. When we got to the overgrown path leading up to the house, the temperature dropped like someone had opened a freezer. I remember that clearly, how I automatically zipped up my hoodie even though it had been a humid night. The trees hung low, their branches heavy and still. No wind, no bugs, just silence. And then we saw it. The Belridge house looked like it had grown out of the forest itself. Ivy crawled up its walls like veins on old skin, and the roof was half caved in on the right side. Most of the windows were broken. The rest were black. There was a porch, warped and sagging, with a single door that hung slightly open. Eli stepped onto the porch and turned to grin at me. "Ladies first, go to hell." He pushed the door open and went inside. I hesitated on the doorstep. The air smelled wrong, moldy and acidic, like wet paper left to rot, but I followed him in anyway. Inside the house was a maze of collapsed beams, torn wallpaper and creaking floorboards. We stayed on the 1st floor at first, shining up flashlights on graffiti-covered walls and water-stained ceilings. Most rooms were empty, just littered with broken furniture and old beer cans from other explorers. But what stuck with me most was the silence. A house that size should have groaned, should have echoed our footsteps, but it was like sound didn't carry properly. Every movement felt swallowed, deadened. We climbed the stairs to the 2nd and 3rd floors, checking out rooms as we went. On the 3rd floor, we found an old mattress with red spray paint all around it. Weird symbols, shapes, maybe letters. I don't know. It didn't look like anything I'd seen before. "You think people really do ceremonies here?" I asked. Eli nodded. "Why not? Perfect spot for it." It wasn't until we reached the final staircase that things started to really change. The stairs to the attic were narrow and steep, like they'd been added as an afterthought. At the top was a crooked wooden door, warped and rotting around the handle. Eli looked at me. "Ready?" I didn't answer. He turned the knob. It creaked, but the door opened. The attic was small, just one room with a sloped ceiling and a single window facing the forest. Moonlight poured in, lighting up a 5-pointed star drawn in white chalk on the floor. There were candles, long since melted down, and in the corner, a closet half open. The smell hit me instantly. Rot, decay, something long dead. "Jesus," I said, covering my nose. Eli stepped inside like it was nothing. He was looking at the star when I noticed something that made my stomach twist. There was a rock on the window sill, one with a spray-painted M on it. We hadn't brought any rocks. I was just about to speak when Eli froze. "Did you hear that?" I hadn't, until I did. Footsteps from downstairs. Several sets, moving slowly, on purpose. Then a voice, male, deep, emotionless. "They're up there." I looked at Eli. "We need to go," he nodded. We turned to leave, but just as we stepped out of the attic, we saw them. 2 figures in cloaks with hoods, standing at the base of the stairs. They didn't speak, just stared. Eli shoved me back into the attic and slammed the door. "Roof," he whispered. "Now." The attic window was shattered. Eli kicked out the remaining glass and stepped onto the sloped roof. I followed, heart pounding, knees weak. Below us, more cloaked figures were pouring out of the back of the house. 5, maybe 6. They were spreading out into the woods, looking. We scrambled across the roof, trying to reach the opening we'd seen earlier that might lead back down. It was locked. And then, they're up there, the voice yelled from below. Closer now, definitely human, but wrong in its tone. Flat, unnaturally deep dot. Without thinking, I kicked the opening with everything I had. It cracked, splintered. I kicked. Again, it gave way. I fell through, landing hard on the wooden floor below. My flashlight skittered across the floor. Eli dropped in after me. We didn't speak. We just ran down the stairs, through the hall, out the back, into the woods. We didn't stop until we were deep into the trees, crouched behind a fallen log. My lungs burned. My leg throbbed from the fall. Eli was grinning again, but it didn't reach his eyes. "What was that?" I whispered. He shook his head. "A cult, had to be. Some sick ceremony stuff." We waited, watched the house from a distance. At least 7 figures, maybe more, searched the woods with flashlights. They never called the police, never shouted names, just searched, slow and methodical, like they were hunting. We stayed hidden until dawn, and we never went back. We told Casey what happened. She didn't believe us at first, thought we were just drunk and making it up. But 2 weeks later, a body was found in those woods. A missing hiker, mauled, they said. But there were no animal tracks, no signs of a struggle. The Belridge house was officially sealed up after that. Cops posted warnings, unsafe structure, they claimed. But Eli and I knew better. That attic wasn't just empty, it was waiting.